I guess that he thinks that a suppressed vote, a lower voter turnout, will work for him and that it will help him win the election. So this is a deliberate effort to defund and destroy the U.S. Postal Service so that people cannot engage in mail-in ballots. That's not Bernie Sanders talking. That's what Donald Trump is telling the American people. And it is an outrage, Chuck.
Well, that was Bernie Sanders calling out the Trump administration and the Trump campaign's efforts to essentially suppress the vote by dismantling the post office. Luckily, Democrats finally woke up and realized maybe now is not a great time to vacation, go on recess. So now they are launching an emergency effort to prevent Trump from rigging the election through dismantling the post office. So Pelosi, for instance, is calling for the House to return to Capitol Hill. That's likely to happen this coming weekend. And the Senate, some members of the Senate are also considering reconvening to figure out what to do about the fact that Trump is trying to essentially rig this election. So Democrats in the House Oversight Committee have also demanded that the new Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy, testify on August 24th to answer charges that his controversial new policy changes are intended to deliberately slow voting by mail. As we've mentioned before, DeJoy is a Trump loyalist and has donated millions of dollars to Donald Trump. In a letter to DeJoy, Oversight Committee Chair Representative Carolyn Maloney said, quote, "Over the past several weeks, there have been startling new revelations about the scope and gravity of operational changes you are implementing at hundreds of postal facilities without consulting adequately with Congress, the Postal Regulatory Commission, or the Board of Governors. Your testimony is particularly urgent given the troubling influx of reports of widespread delays at postal facilities across the country, as well as President Trump's explicit admission last week that he has been blocking critical coronavirus funding for the Postal Service in order to impair mail-in voting efforts for the upcoming elections in November." I also want to note that he has agreed to testify before the House Oversight Committee. So there's some, agreement there, luckily. But there are some members of Congress, particularly Representatives Ted Lieu and Hakeem Jeffries, who are saying that the FBI needs to investigate what's happening with the Postal Service. In their letter, they write, "Multiple media investigations show that Postmaster DeJoy and the Board of Governors have retarded the passage of mail. If their intent in doing so was to affect mail-in balloting or was motivated by personal financial reasons, then they likely committed crimes." And Jake, just to remind the audience, some of the things that have already been done, as was mentioned earlier, slowed delivery times. They have removed high-speed mail sorters in some facilities. Those sorters are obviously going to be needed in order to process an influx of mail-in ballots. And they've also issued a warning that mail-in ballots will no longer be treated as priority mail, which is insane.
And of course, they also started taking away the actual boxes in your neighborhood, the post office boxes. And so they now say, because of the intense pressure that are being put on, okay, fine, we won't take away any more of those drop boxes until after the election. And we will not disassemble any more of the sorting machines until after the election. And that's what Chief of Staff Mark Meadows said. But that's only because they put tremendous pressure on. Now, I want to give credit to the people who did that. Number one is, as you saw in the beginning here, Bernie Sanders. He immediately went on the warpath. And that's partly because he's been trying to protect the post office for decades now. And so he has seen them attack it over and over again. So to him, this was not a surprise or something new. It was just the worst form of that assault, because it's also an assault on our democracy, as he clarified. So I love that he was on all the Sunday talk shows fighting for the post office and for our democracy. Secondly, Al Gore came out today as a helpful reminder of what happens when people steal elections, and was super forceful in saying, under no circumstances should the post office be trifled with in the middle of an election. So I love to see that. But I want to give credit to Ted Lieu and Hakeem Jeffries, probably the most. And if you follow the Young Turks really, really closely, you'll know that I'm not a giant fan of Hakeem Jeffries. Out of the four of those guys, love three of them. Representative Jeffries, has his issues. Now, But all we do on this show is we're honest with you guys and we're fair, okay? So credit where credit is due. I love that Representative Jeffries is working with Ted Lieu on this one, and they're exactly right. There are two provisions that they talk about here. One is 18 USC 1701 that makes it a crime to, quote, knowingly and willfully obstruct mail delivery. So if you're slowing down the mail on purpose, because remember, look, just the fact that they're slowing it down right in front of our own eyes that we can clearly see and there's overwhelming evidence for, might not be enough to convict, believe it or not, because you got to go beyond a reasonable doubt. But if they wrote anything down, or if any witness says, yeah, we slowed down the mail on purpose, gone. That's a federal crime and they should go to prison. Number two is 18 USC 595, which criminalizes using the power of any federal agency to influence an election. If they have a witness or any memo or email written to that effect, gone, prison sentence. DeJoy should be locked away. Now, only if he did it, only if he did it. We're not like the Trump people, just lock up our political opponents. No, if he's breaking the law in these super important ways, he should understand that there's going to be severe consequences. Now, look, I love that they're fighting this way before the election so that we can make sure that everybody's mail-in ballots are protected, including the Republican ones. We want a fair election, an election that actually tells us who won, right? But do I have any faith that Democrats will hold Republicans accountable even if they cheated after an election? No, I have no faith at all, none. But for now, good, great, and I'm super happy to give them credit.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm definitely happy that they're gonna go back to Capitol Hill. I mean, the fact that they literally took recess was ridiculous to me. But some of the messaging coming from the Trump administration is changing. I don't want anyone to think under any circumstance that I trust Mark Meadows, for instance. But here's Chief of Staff Mark Meadows speaking over the weekend about changing course, the post office changing course when it came to some of the decisions that they've recently made. Let's take a look.
Concerns about whether or not it's going to work, then it would seem that more funding would help as opposed to taking sorting machines off a line so that it will be more difficult to do mail-in.
Well, there's no sorting machines that are going offline between now and the election. That's something that my Democrat friends are trying to do to stoke fear out there. That's not happening.
Are you saying that sorting machines have not been taken offline and removed? Are you asserting that did not happen?
I'm saying that sorting machines between now and the election will not be taken offline. Listen, I had postal undermine.
The ones that have been taken offline in the last couple months.
No. So when you're looking at this, these postal machines and the drawdown, that was a 2006 bill that has been implemented that I don't necessarily agree with, but that's not this Postmaster General that did that. That was the previous Postmaster General under Obama.
That's just a lie. Like, by the way, Obama wasn't president in 2006. What are you talking about? So he cites the year 2000. Like, this was a plan that they had in place since 2006 when Obama was president. What? No, they started decommissioning these mail sorting machines recently, and at the same time, let every single state know that the post office wouldn't have the capacity to process all of these ballots. And by the way, I mean, get a load of Mark Meadows trying to cover up for the fact that there is absolutely no evidence that mail-in voting or absentee voting has led to a prevalence of voter fraud. Take a look at his messaging here.
Do you realize how inaccurate the voter rolls are with just people just moving around, not let alone the people that die off, but sending ballots out just based on a voter roll registration. Anytime you move, you'll change your driver's license, but you don't call up and say, "Hey, by the way,
of widespread voter fraud, though."
But
there's no evidence of widespread voter fraud.
There's no evidence that there's not either. That's the definition of fraud, Jake.
No, that's also a lie. I mean, go ahead, Jen, take it away.
Okay, that's not the definition of fraud. The definition of fraud is when you commit fraud, not I couldn't find any evidence of fraud, and that's the definition of fraud. That's the exact opposite of the definition. So, okay, let's use Mark Meadows' logic. I don't agree with this, but this is Mark Meadows' logic. Yeah, there's no evidence that Mark Meadows is a serial killer, but there's also no evidence that he isn't. I don't know. I mean, I think we should investigate whether Mark Meadows is a serial killer. We got Ted Cruz as Zodiac killer. I don't know. Maybe, previously Meadows was a killer clown, a la John Wayne Gacy. I don't know. There isn't any evidence of it, but there's also no evidence that he didn't do it, that he didn't massacre many people. Come on. Under any other context, it would be insane to say things like this. And it's insane in this context. Now, again, we're a fair show, so let me be bipartisan in my critique. Just a couple of months ago, and as usual, David Sorolla wrote about this, the Senate unanimously, that means all the Democrats as well, approved Mike Duncan to be the head of the board of governors of USPS, of the Postal Service. And Mike Duncan is among the people who now gets to decide whether DeJoy stays or not as the Postmaster General. Mike Duncan is the head of the Senate Leadership PAC, the Senate Leadership Fund that raises $100 million for Republican senators. Democrats, I mean, there's no end to how stupid they are. Why would you put that guy as the chair of the board of the governors of the post office when you know the Republicans are trying to destroy the post office, and that guy raised $100 million for Senate Republicans? How stupid or complicit are you? So now finally when it reaches their own power, wait, they might rig the election using the post office, so I don't have power anymore. Wait, now all of a sudden Democrats are concerned. Again, minus the exceptions of Bernie Sanders, who's been concerned and been on the warpath for decades on this. And by the way, let me just, if you're wondering why did the Democrats let Mike Duncan be head of board of governors? Why is DeJoy, who's clearly has a giant conflict of interest in the head of the post office, why did the Democrats allow any of this? And if you haven't heard our previous videos about it, as quickly as I can, DeJoy gave $2 million to Trump and the Republican Party. That's just a bribe. Why did he bribe them? Because he wanted to be the head of the post office. Why? Because he has $30 to $75 million invested in competitors and contractors of the post office. The criminality is through the roof. And the reason that, and so he might have just been trying to destroy the post office for his own financial gain. And then he's like, oh no, it's in the middle of an election. Oh, I got caught for no reason because of Trump's clownishness. I'm just trying to make tens of millions of dollars through obvious bribery and corruption. And that's your answer for why the Democrats never held him accountable before, because they participate in that bribery and corruption. So that's why they never called it out. When DeJoy did it or Mike Duncan did it, they happily gave him those positions, which they now regret.
And I wanted to also just respond to the ridiculous statement Meadows made about voter fraud with giving you some actual evidence of how rare voter fraud really is. So Cenk, this is a tweet by Public Citizen, and it says, the mail-in voter fraud rate is 0.00006% over the last 20 years. So there has been research into this, and voter fraud is not a problem in this country. What Donald Trump is clearly trying to do, and it's so transparent, is disenfranchise voters and steal this election.
So guys, I want to give you guys, sometimes Trump says, well, what's the harm? Let's stop mail-in voting just in case 0.006 do it, right? Well, the harm is you block a lot of people from being able to, in fact, millions of people from being able to vote and participate in our democracy to chase after a non-existent problem. So maybe I could put it in terms that Republicans will understand. If 0.00006% of white males do mass shootings in this country, that's actually, the result of that is horrific, right? But if we said, all right, so since that happens at that rate, which it probably does at around that rate, let's make sure no white males can ever leave their house again. You said, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense at all. 99.9999% of white males do not do mass shootings, and it makes no sense to not let them out of their house. So just giving you an example of why their thing of like, hey, it happened once in our lifetime is not a good reason to deny millions of people the right to vote, especially during coronavirus, where the voting bloc that is most heavily represented is senior citizens, and they're also the most vulnerable. Want to win a free electric scooter? Well, our partners at Aspiration and Zoom Electric are making it possible. All you have to do is head to tyt.com/greensummer for your chance to win.